And welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles, Don Henderson with you tonight, and we're going to talk a little Texas Rangers baseball right now. Rusty Burson joined us. He's written a book called 100 Things Rangers Fans Should Know Before They Die, and Rusty joined us by telephone tonight. Rusty, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Hey, I'm glad we finally got to hook up. I'm better now that the book sales are going to sell a little bit more now that they didn't get swept by the Angels this weekend. That would have been
right.
bad.
I know we wanted to get you on a few weeks ago, but I'm glad we were able to reschedule tonight, and I had a chance to read through the book, and you really are a historian of the team. I know they haven't had a lot of success until the last 2 or 3 years, so you had to do some good digging there, huh?
Well, you know what? My dad, I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and so when they moved from Washington, D.C. in 1972, I was about 4, and my dad would get a free ticket once a year or something like that. He'd take me out there. Neither one of us knew one single player out there, not one, when we started going. But from those beginnings, I became a big-time Rangers fan. Of course, I didn't know any better. I mean, that was my team, and so as soon as I could drive, I went out there, and I worked out there, the concession stands and the beer vending every summer. So, yeah, a lot of this is just a labor of love for me.
Well, that's when it's the most fun, to be honest with you, Rusty. When you grow up, I know as a youngster, and, you know, I grew up with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and it was never the same for me after the Dodgers left. I still like baseball, still like the Dodgers on the West Coast, but it wasn't the same as when you went to Ebbets Field to see the Dodgers play. So I can relate to that. I think that's absolutely true.
Well, you know, the guy who wrote the forward for me was Eric Nadell, who's one of the best radio guys in the business. And he grew up a huge Brooklyn Dodgers fan, too. So when they left, he became a Mets fan by default because he hated the Yankees, and he just had to have some team to cheer for. But yeah, Eric Nadell knows exactly what you're talking about. When the Dodgers left town, it broke his heart. And he's seen more bad baseball than me, but not by much.
Well, you know, the funny thing about that was that you know, when the Boston Braves left Braves Field in Boston and went to Milwaukee, it didn't seem like a major transition in baseball. It didn't seem like there was a loss for anybody. They had the Red Sox. There really wasn't a great deal of complaint about the Braves leaving because they weren't doing very well at the gate. They didn't have a real good team. But when the Dodgers left, that was a different story, and a big part of New York City. And not only did the Dodgers leave, but the Giants at the same time. So you got in fresh with Texas Rangers, and now you're getting your reward.
Yeah, you know, I felt like the last 2 years really were a reward for everything we put up with, and you know, of course, I don't know if I'll ever get over Game 6 last year. You know, that's kind of the Bill Buckner moment for Rangers fans, and although the play wasn't nearly as bad as Buckner's, I still have nightmares of Nelson Cruz going back on Freeze's ball, and I think he's going to catch it every time, and he just doesn't. So I'm hoping they can get back there and end that thing.
I know
you know,
said,
Rusty, while we were trying to get you back, I just heard from Doug, which was shocking to me. I don't know that I'll even talk to you tonight because you're in the bowels of Texas A&M. I went to the University of Texas, and I don't even know if I want to continue this conversation.
I forgot about that, Don.
Oh, my goodness. Well, the bowels of Texas A&M. Well, I've heard that like that before, but hey, that's all right. That's all right. How y'all doing?
We were just talking about some of the great characters we mentioned while we were trying to get you back. Me being, actually, Don and I both being New Yorkers, growing up in New York with Nolan Ryan. Nolan had some great years with your team, of course, getting his 7th no-hitter, and then coming in as an owner and really turning things around where they're a legitimate contender.
Well, you know, out of the 100 things, Nolan Ryan's involved in probably about 5 or 6 of those things, including the 2 of the top 3 elements, just because getting him here as a player added legitimacy, and then as the owner, big time legitimacy. And so, you know, everything that he's done has brought credibility to the organization where it didn't have really any credibility at all before he arrived. And I feel like he saved the franchise at least a couple times.
Great.
How big was that no-hitter? I remember watching that. I was living in Florida then. I think it was 94 against Toronto. They had actually the Toronto broadcasters for some reason down here in Florida, and I saw that game.
I think that was huge. Obviously, I think that even the 5,000 strikeout was even bigger, I thought, because people could prepare for that. I mean, with the no-hitter, it's just it's going to come out of nowhere. But so you can't really plan on that, even though Nolan drew a bigger crowd every time, he pitched. But for the 5,000 strikeout that he recorded, that was just such a huge event, and it was like a playoff atmosphere in Arlington, and they did it against Oakland, and Ricky Henderson was the guy who was the 5,000 strikeout, and Ricky did it pretty well. It's interesting because Ricky had broken Lou Brock's stolen base record the same day, earlier in the day when Nolan threw his no hitter, so he kind of stole the spotlight from Ricky Henderson, and then a couple years later he struck Ricky out for his 5,000.
Well, give us an interesting story or two about some of the players that nobody really knows with the Texas Rangers.
Oh, there's so many, but since we're talking New York, I'll say that there's been so many different kind of crazy ownership years, including Eddie Childs, who was he meant well, but he'd run a very, very successful business, and he thought everybody should write down their goals. And Eddie Childs, thought every one of the Rangers players should write down that he was going to hit 400 every single year, and that was the answer to it. Brad Corbett, before him, he meant really well, but Brad just liked trades for the sake of trading, and he was always wheeling and dealing. Toby Harrell was one of the first really, really good players for the Rangers, and he was the first All-Star in Texas, and he was beloved by the fans. So Brad Corbett had a 14-year-old son who particularly loved Toby Harrell, and so the Rangers were trying to work a trade with the Yankees. And so I can't remember who the GM at the time was with the Yankees, maybe the assistant GM, called Brad Corbett at his home in Fort Worth one night and said, Brad, he dialed, and someone answered the phone and said, Brad, at the other end of the line said, yes. He said, so we're going to make this deal or not, Craig Nelson for Toby Harrell. And Brad said, not only no, but hell no, and he hung up the phone. Well, it was Brad's 14-year-old son, so Brad made the decision his 14-year-old was making personnel decisions. And lots of times the Rangers made some pretty ridiculous trades. And I kind of detail some of the worst. Trading for Lee Mazzilli was a terrible trade in Rangers history. The Rangers gave up Ron Darling, and Ron Darling even head up for Mazzilli, who couldn't stand the idea of playing in Arlington and hated the idea. And so, he was gone, and really the Mets, kind of the formative years for some of their great teams were a credit to the Rangers. And, of course, the Rangers traded away a young kid. They thought they were in a pennant race one time in the 80s, and so they traded two young kids, one named Wilson Alvarez, who was a heck of a pitcher, and then another guy you probably heard of, Sammy Sosa, to get Harold Baines.
Yeah, right.
And Sammy Sosa did okay for himself. Harold Baines never really did much in Texas and certainly didn't push him over the edge. So those are just some of the tough stories that, back in the early days of the Rangers and the mid-years where it just seemed like everything they did just kind of went awry as far as trades.
Well, how about, we were talking while we were waiting for you to come back, Rusty, Bobby Valentine. He had a pretty good tenure as a manager of the Rangers, and then the man who fired him became president, George Bush, the owner at the time, although he did not, he felt bad about it, but he felt they had to make a change. What was Bobby Valentine's reign like, in your opinion?
I love Bobby Valentine, and interesting enough, I told you guys before we lost you, Bobby, or I'd worked every summer out there as soon as I could drive. And Bobby Valentine was one of my all-time favorites because I had 2 summer jobs, and one of them was landscaping. So when Bobby Valentine first moved to Texas, I landscaped his yard, so I had that claim to fame. And he was a very, very nice guy to me. Players really liked him, because I just, in talking with Tom Grieve, who was a GM who hired Bobby Valentine, he just felt like that guy knew more baseball than just about anybody on the planet. And when he was dismissed in 1992, he'd won 581 games, which was more than any manager in the team's history. But he also had the dubious distinction of managing more games with one team without winning a division title, a pennant, or World Series than any other manager in Major League history. So while he was good, the Rangers just could never get it done. And it really, Bobby, it's hard to fire the entire team. So Bobby had to take the fall. I think the Rangers they actually had a winning record when they let him go. He made the comment, it was like Rangers were 45-41, and 6.5 out to the first place in the West when he was fired. And Bobby was at the press conference and said, I'm going to stick around here and watch the Rangers win it all. And it just didn't happen. But I was rooting for him to do well every spot he's ever been. And Bobby Valentine was one of the really good managers in Rangers history, probably the best in the first 20 years of the franchise. Really before the mid-'90s when Johnny Oates led those teams to 3 playoffs appearances in a span of 4 years. Right. I thought truly the Rangers were the second-best team in baseball at that time. And unfortunately, their rise in the mid-'90s happened to coincide with the great dynasty that the Yankees became.
Right. Johnny Oates, of course, associated with the Phillies for such a long period of time, so we knew him pretty well. And how about the relationship with Alex Rodriguez? He did not things just didn't blend in Texas for Alex Rodriguez.
Well, they did not, and but and a lot of Rangers fans take a great deal of delight in booing A-Rod and hating A-Rod. He's public enemy number one. I never felt that way about A-Rod. I thought he played hard here. He put up really good numbers, but just everything backfired around him. It's like they obviously the contract was just crazy. The amount of money they paid A-Rod was ridiculous, and it hamstrung the organization. But not winning was never A-Rod's fault. I mean, the guy just put up some really good numbers, and he just didn't have guys around him. That was part of the deal. But I will say the moves around him were just so bad, because the Rangers went out and they signed a big ace pitcher the following year after A-Rod signed. It was Chan-Ho Park, who had been really good out west, and he was just miserable in Arlington. And that kind of goes hand in hand with with all the bad deals the Rangers have made through the years. And but finally, I'll say that it finally came together when they traded Teixeira to Atlanta, and that trade has really formed the nucleus of back-to-back World Series teams and a team that, has no chance to go back to the World Series this year.
If you look through some of the pitchers that the Rangers had, they had some Hall of Fame pitchers. You're talking about Gaylord Perry, Ferguson Jenkins, Bert Blyleven pitched for the Rangers for a while. Of course, Nolan Ryan, we mentioned him. And then you had one of the great phenoms that never was. Don, you remember the name David Clyde?
Oh, boy. Yes, indeed. I'll tell you,
David.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, David Clyde, he was the first guy who actually saved the franchise, because when the Rangers, the first 2 years, they had lost 205 games, including a shortened or strike shortened first year. So they needed something. Absolutely something to put some butts in seats, and David Clyde was the guy, and they drafted him with a number 1 overall pick in '73, and he was just an absolutely phenomenal high school pitcher from Houston. They drafted him of course it's fresh in my mind because the draft is tonight. No. They drafted him in June, and they decided he was the number 1 overall pick in '73. and they decided, the ownership decided that they needed to start him. Bob Short was the owner who had moved the team from Washington to Arlington, and Bob Short demanded that David Clyde make a start in Arlington so that, people would get excited and come to the ballpark. Waddy Herzog was the manager of the Rangers at that time. He was totally against it, but he finally said, okay, we'll let him make this start. And then Short said, no, let's let him have 2 starts and at home, and then we'll send him back down. And again, Herzog was against it, but he finally said, okay, we'll let him have 2 Major League starts, and then we'll send him back down and go let him develop. And, he stepped out the first night he ever pitched as a rookie, June 27, 1973, 35,698 fans, which was, just an astronomical amount of fans compared to what they had in Arlington. And he walked the first 2 guys, facing the Twins, on 9 pitchers, walked the first 2 guys, and then he struck out the side to end the inning. It was just that kind of night. Clyde pitched 5 innings and left with a 4-2 lead, and he wound up getting the win. And people were just fanatical about David Clyde. And then the next time his turn came up, he pitched in front of 33,000 and left with a 4-3 lead. But, it was just Bob Short was very short-sighted, and he demanded that Herzog keep him in the rotation. And, Waddy, to this day, he wrote in his book, that he was just, long after he retired, he said it was one of the worst mistakes that he'd ever seen in baseball, because the 3rd game Clyde started was on the road at Milwaukee, and the Rangers lost 17-2, and that was the beginning of the decline for this poor, wonderful prospect who was sacrificed to save the franchise.
Yeah, and Whitey Herzog, one of the great managers in baseball. One of the reasons I brought up A-Rod, because right now, Nolan Ryan is confronted with almost the same situation as when A-Rod came to the Texas Rangers with Hamilton. With the numbers he's putting on the board, other than a few injuries that he's had that have held him back a little bit this year, you wouldn't know it by looking at the numbers. But for the number of games he's played, he's going to be confronted with the same thing. Do I give as much money to Hamilton as I gave to Rodriguez and really dismantle the whole team?
Well, and you know what? I think that the interesting thing about now is that the Rangers are selling out virtually every other night. And this has gone from a team that was 2 years ago in bankruptcy hearings to a team that is very well off financially right now. The merchandising sales, which I know Major League Baseball takes a big chunk out of it, but the Rangers truly are a hip team in Dallas-Fort Worth, and they've surpassed the Dallas Cowboys in popularity with the young kids. They'll never surpass the older generation who grew up with the Cowboys and Tom Landry, but the kids who are in school now, the 10-year-olds and the 14-year-olds, they think the Rangers are so much more hip than the Dallas Cowboys, who haven't been to the Super Bowl since the 90s. And, well, the Rangers have been back-to-back World Series, and so people are coming out to the ballpark in droves now. So that gives them the financial flexibility where they can offer Roy Oswalt a $5 million deal this year for half a year. So really, no one's going to have to look, and General Manager John Daniels has done a fabulous job assembling this team. And he's going to make some hard decisions. And, the Rangers will never be the Yankees, and they'll never be the Red Sox with their ability just to throw money at folks. They're going to have to make wise decisions. But on the other hand, they're also not the small market anymore. They're also not a team that's going to have to pinch pennies like the Oaklands and the Kansas Cities. This is a team that can go out. They made every effort to re-sign Cliff Lee. Well, they didn't get Cliff Lee, but they turned around and they offered Adrian Beltre a 5-year deal. He's been huge and made that defense so much better. And so, looking towards next year, will they sign Mike Napoli? Will they re-sign Josh Hamilton? Will they break the bank? I'm convinced they won't break the bank, but I'm convinced that they'll make the right decision based on all the right decisions John Daniels and Nolan Ryan have made. And, I just have total faith in those guys, where I spent the first 30 years of the organization thinking whatever move can go wrong, they're going to follow Murphy's Law.
Well, Don and I, we had a chance to cover Josh Hamilton a little bit down here when he was with the Rays. Of course, we all know the tough times he went through with the drugs and all that. But he had a bit of seemed like a little bump in the road last year, Rusty. But boy, he's been playing well this year. And I guess they always had somebody with him, right, as kind of a caretaker or a roommate. And that person went to the Reds. I forget his name now. But is there somebody kind of watching him?
Yeah, and of course, this thing with Josh, and my wife and I talk about it all the time, and it's really sad because he's an incredible player, he's an incredible man, and he's just haunted by these addictions, and it's just, we always say, God gives us all something where we have to encounter and grow from, and you just hope that Josh can stay clean. He did have somebody, Johnny Nairn, who was with him all the time. And Nairn left. And then so, he had this relapse in the off season. And, it was very difficult to see, how he was going to respond to that. He had a miserable spring training and hit one home run. And then, he just burst out of the gate. He's been on fire. But Josh can look as good as any player I've ever seen in baseball. He can also look pretty bad at times, too. There are times when he just doesn't miss anything, and there's times when he just looks, like anybody else in baseball. The game makes us, as soon as you make it look easy, they'll turn around and make it look hard.
Wow.
But Josh he's been good for the Rangers, and quite frankly, the Rangers have been very good for Josh. And so my hope for Josh is that he'll give the Rangers a hometown discount, because I think living in Arlington and being around that franchise is good for him. I don't think Josh Hamilton needs to be in New York City. He doesn't need to be in Los Angeles. He needs to be at a place that's a little slower pace than that, and that has a little slower lifestyle, I think. I
would agree. I think you're right there, and you wish him nothing but the very best of luck. And because I tell you, if you look at it, I'm not a great believer in that home run hitting contest at the All-Star game. I think that ruins more players for the second half of the season than it does good. But when you saw him in that second round, I mean, it was you just never saw anything like it in recent years.
Yeah, isn't that true? And the funny thing is that most people don't even remember he didn't win that contest.
Right. He didn't. Yeah.
It was such an incredible display he put on. But that he did not win it, and that's the thing that people just remembered the second round display, and the New York fans chanting his name, and it's pretty amazing to think back on that. But he didn't win it.
No, he swung himself out.
He sure did. He sure did.
I'm convinced that you look at the same thing happened to
Bobby Abreu.
Bobby Abreu had the same problem. With the Mets. Look at what happened to him after
David Wright. Yeah.
David Wright, same thing. I mean, I'll tell you, I'd be very leery about having one of my players getting that home run because I just think it sort of takes them off stride.
Well, I agree with you 100% there. And speaking of home run hitters, the Rangers, most people just associate them with a great offense and no pitching through the years. But when they first moved to Arlington, they had a guy named Frank Howard who was the big home run hitter at the time.
Right.
And then they went out and they developed Jeff Burroughs, who was the MVP of the American League in 1974. And Jeff Burroughs hated playing in Arlington so bad because that original stadium, the old Arlington Stadium, was a miserable hitter's park. And they did everything they could. It was just an overgrown minor league stadium. They put up these huge billboards to hopefully block the winds, the swirling winds in Arlington. And it helped a little bit, but it was still just a terrible hitter's park. The only guy I ever know who liked hitting in Arlington was Al Oliver, and he just hit line drives all the time. But Burroughs demanded to be traded because he hated hitting there. And so now this new park, or I would say it's new, it opened in 1994. It's not that new now, but it's a great hitter's park. It's a great hitter's park for Josh Hamilton.
Right.
And, towards right field, you get the jet stream, and you get balls that fly out of that stadium that shouldn't be anything more than long outs. But the difference between the last 2 years and every other year is that they've developed some young pitching. And I'd say that the Rangers bullpen is probably the best bullpen in the major leagues right now. And their starters, while there's not a dominant guy out there, there's 4 or 5 guys out there that are going to give you a chance to win every night. And we'll see how Roy O comes along, but that's going to do nothing but add, some strength to the back end of that rotation.
A lot of depth. And the other, when you mentioned Al Oliver, you could wake him up at midnight, give him a bat, and he'd get a hit.
Al Oliver was one of my favorite players to watch. He was an incredible hitter, and of course, Al Oliver is one of the best stories in this whole book. I love Scoop, and Scoop had more confidence in himself than just about any player that I've ever listened to. And he's not arrogant. He was just supremely confident. And some of the things that Al would say just would crack you up. I mean, he just hit frozen ropes all over the field. And in '78, he hit 324, second behind only Rod Carew. And I'll never forget the day. And he was playing in Detroit, and he had almost went to the manager and said, hey, I'd like to have the day off because it's a doubleheader day in Detroit. And he had stayed up with some friends, and Al didn't drink, and so it wasn't that he was out there partying or anything, but Al decided to go ahead and, hit that day, and he had just the most incredible day I think Al had ever had. He in the doubleheader, he hit 8 base hits and 21 total bases in the doubleheader. He had 4 homers, a double, and a triple. So that's a pretty good day, and he had nearly asked for the day off. But yeah, I think Pat Corrales said one day, a bad day for Al Oliver is if he goes 1 for 4. That's a really bad day for him.
Well, Rusty, unfortunately we're out of time. We can talk baseball for hours, and name of the book is called 100 Things Rangers Fans Should Know or Do Before They Die. Rusty Burson has been our guest. It's published by Triumph Books. Do you have a website, Rusty, if we can get a hold of the book or get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. TriumphBooks.com is the best way to go right now. And Triumph has done many sports books, and so they've got kind of a drop-down gadget for every pro team and college team. And so just if you go to TriumphBooks.com and look for the Texas Rangers, you'll find this book. And it's a $14.95. You'll have an enjoyable time going through memory lane, and you might even root a little bit for the Rangers, knowing all the struggles that they've gone through to get to this point.
Well, Rusty, thank you so much. Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rusty. We'll talk to you again.
Okay, bye-bye.